Sorry, we're going on a bit, aren't we? Shall I just not talk? What does Twitter say about that? Hi, I'm Paul Hilder. I've spammed most of you probably at some point. So when Malcolm Gladwell wrote that piece about how today's networked activists are trivial and ineffective by comparison with the courageous sit-in organisers of the civil rights movement, I mean, some of us took this quite personally. Not because I thought he was right, because I knew he was wrong, but it was my Malcolm Gladwell. I would have sent him an email if he'd had an email list. But and then, you know, history has a way of bringing karma back around. So within a few short months, we heard about these interesting events in the Middle East. And the word Schadenfreude does not describe how I felt. Mostly about Hosni Mubarak, actually, but a little bit about Malcolm Gladwell as well. It's interesting, even Evgeny Morozov has recently become a little bit more of a cyber optimist, I see, and it's partly about what's going on with WikiLeaks, but it's also partly about what's been going on in the Middle East. I think what's just happened in Egypt and what's really going on in societies around the world right now is much richer and more interesting, as many people have said, than some of the facile debates which happen in the media. It has seismic implications for the organising models of NGOs, of political parties, even of corporations and governments. But it also heralds danger as well as promise for the future of our world. Let's look at what happened in Egypt. Eric is absolutely right that had been brewing for a long time and that real activists use any tools that come to hand. And you know, the work of Islamic activists as well as trade unions and of digital activists was really important in what happened there. I mean, one of the things that happened was that over a period of several years, people were experimenting with Facebook and building a sense of collective efficacy and breaking a fear barrier on Facebook. And they were campaigning against on economic struggles and campaigning against police brutality and building up circles of trust in that environment. Usually, I think Facebook is a hopeless environment for organising, but in a totalitarian society which has opened up that particular tool, it becomes useful because people will pay attention to a Facebook message. And this really emphasizes the importance of understanding context. But the role that the social technology of Facebook played alongside unions, alongside all sorts of social forcing factors in Egypt, it just took it the extra stage, and then people got into Tahrir Square, which was a social technology of its own. It's a temporary autonomous zone. But we're finding that spontaneous, apparently spontaneous organisation was not enough. It was not enough to deliver lasting change, and it will not be enough to deliver lasting change. So you go back to the real forms of organisation and institutions in civil society which need to deliver on change. So, you know, the internet can help, but it's not the answer all on its own. I think there's a real danger that a rising global generation of activists learn the wrong lessons from what's going on at the moment. I'm a big fan of a lot of the self-organisation that's going on, a lot of organisation below the self-organisation, if you know what I mean. But there is a real danger that some of the purists and proponents of things like Twitter self-organisation are isolating themselves and cutting other people off from vital tools because we need institutions. We need institutions on the internet just as we need institutions in the rest of real life. And trade unions are great institutions, and 38 Degrees for my money is a great institution, and My Society for my money is a great institution. And the way in which we can have arguments about all of these things isn't a bad thing either. Micah White, that article really annoyed me. And in a way, what he says is true, and he beautifully describes the crassest, most transactional, most incompetent, and in the US, all too frequent abuse of network technologies by professionals and NGOs, and it's just completely inauthentic. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The fact that it is possible to do this stuff badly does not mean that it is not possible to do it well. Malcolm Gladwell, again, he described the most trivial media groupie versions of change through social media. Iran was a classic example. I got into an argument with Evgeny Morozov, where I think I won. I think he acknowledged that I won. Where he was talking about it wasn't a Twitter revolution in Iran. There wasn't. Facebook was used to send messages to millions of people who went to the streets. People were contacting each other through these social media channels using mobile phones at parties over a period of 10 years. This went on, and it was online and it was offline. And networks of solidarity were built. People did some very interesting stuff with circumvention technologies in the way. So internet activism, incredibly important in Iran, but just not Twitter. It's not my fault the media don't cover the real story. I just want to step back for a minute. I used to be a big fan of Adbusters, which Micah now works with, but it just didn't work for most people. It wasn't a mode of engagement that worked for most people. I came to network organizing basically because the existing models of organizing were failing. They were falling short. When millions of people around the world marched on a single day against the Iraq War, we were inspired, many of us, by what the New York Times was calling the rise of the second superpower. But those flash-in-the-pan marches failed. And that shows that the transience of Facebook groups and Twitter is neither new nor unique to the internet. There was a boomerang of disillusionment after that moment. And we learned the lesson that we needed to find new ways to sustain and channel progressive social energy. And then we had Make Poverty History a couple of years later, which reminded us, on the one hand, of the scale of popular feeling about public issues, but also that we cannot rely completely either on coalitions of established NGOs, one of which I now work for, or on well-meaning celebrity activists, and that building dynamic new movements is unlikely to happen from the top down. So it's these experiences of the failure of old-fashioned kinds of activism to do what was needed, the gaps, let's say, that existed, that led many of us to explore building new kinds of institutions, network movements. And Avaz, which I helped to launch in 2007 and has since grown to over 7 million members worldwide, is today the largest example of such a movement and not big enough by half. But it's true that through Avaz, millions of global citizens have come together successfully to change government policies from Brazil to Japan, real hard evidence of changing major government policies. They've donated millions of dollars to democratic movement building, something that's bloody hard to fund except through the trade unions these days, and to civilian reconstruction from Burma to the Middle East to Haiti. And perhaps most importantly, to touch on the point that Micah made, to spread a simple, contagious idea, a meme, that most people everywhere want a better world, and that by coming together, we can help to build it. You can't underestimate the extent to which a sense of impotence and disillusionment is the biggest barrier to ever engaging in activism. And the emails that I got from kids in little towns all over the world saying, wow, you've made me believe in something. And they went and got involved in stuff in their local areas. It's a virus, and I think one of the things I'm most proud of with ours is how that virus spread. Sorry, it's choking me up. It's a bit pathetic, isn't it? Anyway, so Avaz, one of the things it's done is given support and solidarity to courageous activists in all sorts of challenging and dangerous situations. It's flash mob parliaments. Malcolm Gladwell, I don't think, knows this, but it's even helped organize sit-ins, notably at the Copenhagen summit, where non-violent activists read out the names of millions of petition signers. They were thrown out, then they encircled the negotiations and made sure that a weak outcome could not be greenwashed. Vars members who come up to me always wanted to argue and discuss about things. One of the things they said most was, thank you for the links at the bottom of the email, because they felt that there was a kind of a respect and a deliberative approach there, that we were providing a kind of evidence base and a set of pieces of information that they didn't necessarily encounter through their ordinary media experience. So for many people, a Vars is a form of media. Petitions. I know internet or Facebook petitions, which are never delivered to their targets, deserve our scorn, but petitions really are a vital tool for citizens, and they help build movements. The Chartists recognised that in 1848. They combine high-level lobbying with media shaming, with the legitimacy and force of participatory democracy, as 38 Degrees did recently with the Save Our Forests campaign. Testing. Micah goes on about testing as being evil and markety. And testing is a profoundly democratic practice. It acts as a check and a balance on organisers who tend to be enraptured with their own rhetoric and their own policy ideas and their own theories of change, which very often don't have any resonance whatsoever for most people. So, you know, testing is one of the techniques which leads activist leaders to be more democratic, more accountable, and it leads, frankly, to many more people getting engaged in these movements. So, and I think some very interesting things going on in the world right now. From Egypt to the streets of Britain, there are network organisers working with the grain of how societies work today, sort of individualistic solidarity. And they're combining old and new tactics to do things which are, I think in the long view, if we look at a decade or more, potentially as historic as the civil rights or the independence movements of the last century. But there are some bigger challenges. First, you know, these are technologies and approaches to building movements and having an impact on how we're governed, which aren't generally available at the moment. They're only available to a few people. Aren't that available in poorer and emerging economies. And I can tell you, Avaza's biggest membership is in Brazil, 750,000. Massive national successes. This stuff works outside the Anglosphere and in the global south. But it's not available there right now in a well-organized way. There's a difference between thinking that social media is going to save you through self-organization, as through some sort of magical thinking, and doing the hard work of building social structures using network technologies that enable us to change our societies for the better. And that's what I think we need to do. And I think we also need to get better at shaping the prevailing public conversation from global media to the doorstep. And I think that meme activism is something which the Tea Party movement have done much, much better than progressives have globally, if you look at what they've done to perceptions of government. I think I'm pretty much done. Yeah, and we also need to change the real world. Build better institutions for governments and our economies, because we're facing some pretty big challenges right now. But I think this kind of network-based organising is a critically important tool. You just have to do it right. All right, that's enough.
Sorry, and we're going to go till 7:15 if that's okay, because we started about 15 minutes late. So my summary, cross fingers I get this right, and panellists, if I get it wrong, tell me. So Micah White, have activists become obsessed by metrics, seem to be his theme. And, you know, base your campaigns on passion, tap into compassion was his thing. And also the meme warfare, which seemed to come through as well with what Paul was just saying as well. Naomi, Online and digital is just one tool amongst many, and there's a crossover between on and offline, and they go hand in hand. And she gave us some wonderful examples of that. Tom, you know, there's different kinds of activism, and you know, he made some really interesting points about the academic work that has gone on, about understanding how people participate in activism, particularly online, and that neither Morozov or Sharkey were right. The controversial Merck there, maybe. And so, you know, there's a lot that hasn't been studied yet, so our role potentially is to provide data to the academics. Rasmus, you know, it's activism versus slacktivism is just a misnomer of a debate. This isn't something new. We've always had this. You know, nothing new here seems to be his kind of theme, and then illustrating that. You know, digital second, activism first. Then Sam, no, collectivism isn't wrong. He wanted us to all know. But, you know, how does that relate into democracy, and what's the cost of democracy if we do extensive collectivism? How does an MP know what's important? What is the value of any email to an MP, whether it's customised or not? Then David from 38 Degrees, we've got sort of, he gave some really good illustrations of the work that they've been doing, particularly with the Save Our Forests campaign. You know, 500,000 people getting involved. So digital enables that pooling of ideas, keeping up with the news. And his challenge to NGOs was, how do you catch up with that 24-hour news cycle? How can different forms of activism sort of coalesce, really? Eric. This is a sterile debate, I think he said, you know, and made something about morons about people and telephones, you know. So serious activists use sort of every tech available, but really it's about organisation, and that is key. I made some sort of observations about Egypt and Libya and the differences there that we're now seeing, and the cost now of war. And sort of the Dunstore example too, of the early day motion that then enabled more activism to kind of happen. So that time-honoured tradition, he said, of trade union solidarity. Then Paul, it's about overcoming apathy, that change in the real world. There is a lot of seismic potential, but context is the key. So institutions are key to long-term change, and a whole load of challenges there about, you know, our need to get better social structures. I think that was as quickly as I could summarise everyone. I hope that was correct. But now, turn to the person next to you, have a chat about what you've heard, remind yourselves what you've heard and what questions are in your heads now, right now, and comments. Come forward. I'd be like going, oh, I can't move though. No. Do you need a hand? Could I sit in the middle? If that's all right. No, I know. It's like, have I read everyone? Have I read everyone? No, it's like, no, I think I did. No, look.